The year was 1971. Richard Nixon was in the White House and Pierre Elliott Trudeau was the Prime Minister of Canada for the first time. The month was October. The week was the 30th and the 31st. The French Connection was the biggest movie in theaters, and 'Cause I Love You by Slade was making the charts, but the number one song of the day was Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves by Cher. The big news story on October 31st was a bomb exploding at the top of the Post Office Tower in London, but a bigger hit was about to be dropped. That's right, Pink Floyd's sixth studio album, Meddle. Meddle by Pink Floyd. Yes, I am going back and looking at past albums that I just love. Something outside the Masterpiece Theater. I figured I'm going to take this opportunity now and take a look at some of those albums that really helped shape my musical experience now that the dust kind of has settled. I'm also doing this as a present to my father for his birthday as well as Father's Day. I asked him which album he would like me to review and he chose this one. He really helped shape my musical listening choices. He took me to my first concert when I was 14, 15, which was Yes. It got to the point where as a teenager I thoroughly enjoyed all the music that he presented me with, and then I would go out, find new bands to bring back to him. So it kind of came full circle in that sense. But let's actually talk about the music. Like, this is why we're here. We're here to talk about Meddle. And Meddle is a very interesting Pink Floyd album. In my mind, Pink Floyd went through a couple different eras. You had like the original 3 or 4 albums where Syd Barrett was kind of at the helm with Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Saucerful of Secrets, Moore, and even to a certain extent Ummagumma. Then we come into more of like that really experimental side of things, with my favorite album being Atom Heart Mother, Meddle, and Obscured by Clouds, and then from there we get into the more well-known albums of Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals in the Wall. So this is kind of the midpoint where they were transitioning away from the 60s sounds and more into the progressive rock, experimentational concept album sides, because this is really the last album that they put out. Arguably, Obscured by Clouds can be included within this, because after this they went full board into the concept album. And because of that, this is the album that holds a few songs that don't really fit. Like, this one felt less like a concept album and more of just a bunch of songs that were written and placed down onto an LP. And I'm going to go through just really quickly and talk about most of the songs on this album, because there's one track in particular that I think needs a little bit more time. The first song being One of These Days, purely instrumental song, and really shook the landscape. Like, this guy just started off with a crisp, clear bass line from Roger Waters, and that bass line just really solidifies the song, because One of These Days is pumping, it's grinding, it's a lot more energetic and a lot more just almost more of a powerhouse than a lot of the tracks that we had from its predecessing albums. And when we come into that kind of interlude near the beginning where it's almost like the Edgar Wright with Frankenstein, where it's like and then we get that vocal where it's just like, one of these days I'm going to cut you into little pieces. That almost reminded me of like almost like a reverse Careful with That Axe, Eugene. There's that spoken word where it's a whisper. This one's almost like a growl, like there's a presence in the dark and you can't see it, but you know it's there, and it's just gonna wreck you. And after that's said, it's got that bam, you've got the revisiting of the main theme, and it just brings the song to a great finale. One of Pink Floyd's really like underrated tracks. Like, whenever anybody talks about how great Pink Floyd is, they always kind of forget how masterful One of These Days is. The band chose very wisely to follow this up with A Pillow of Winds, and it's a perfect title for this kind of a track. It's just the acoustic guitars, it's just those very humble vocals of Gilmour, and it almost feels like it's got the same kind of chord structure as Entangles from Genesis does. Listen to it, especially that ending, like the outro of that. this song is needed after One of These Days. Even though the two songs are very, very different, they still have that same kind of root, with One of These Days being like that very like bombastic, scary, oh my gosh, what's going on. Pillow Full of Winds is that kind of letdown, that calming, that it's okay, don't worry, we're just here for a good time, which then brings us into Fearless. And Fearless arguably is like the only real single off of this album. I know One of These Days is more of a recognizable one, but Fearless was the song that I could hear off of the radio, and sometimes even did when I was listening to the local like classic rock radio station. They would play this a lot on their, they would call it Psychedelic Sundays, where they would play songs from like 1965 to 1975, that decade. And this song would come up every once in a while because it fit just perfectly in that. Where, again, it's a little bit of that transition, moving away from the acid trippy, but not quite reaching that experimental. This is just kind of a fun little track, and it's very humble and, like, very intimate as well. Like, it's very much of, like, just sitting at a jazz club, and they're in between sets, and this is just something to kind of put on for a little bit of fun. And who's the fool who wears the crown? And speaking about fun, the last two tracks on the first side, San Topez and Seamus. These guys are just pure fun. San Topez is definitely kind of like a sunny afternoon in like a very hot climate by the sea. And it's just kind of like, yeah, we're here, we're kind of on vacation, almost like it's a very relaxing song. And something that Pink Floyd really didn't do before and after. Like, they did a little bit in the early careers, but it was always more of like a trippy fun. This is more of just like a relaxing, enjoying the day kind of fun. And Seamus is definitely that. It's just like this almost tongue-in-cheek bluesy to the point where you can even hear like the dogs howling. You know, it's that kind of like, it's been lonely on my saddle since my horse died. And again, it's that fun atmosphere that the band really utilized on this. And Meddle is actually a really good name for this album because they're just kind of meddling around. They're just having a little bit of fun. And so those two tracks really end the first half of this album. And the first half of this album is definitely kind of a hodgepodge. Like, it's less, as I said, less of a concept album and just more of songs that the band has written up to this point. Now, we come into the second side of this album, and that is of Echoes. So, Echoes. This is one of the songs that most Pink Floyd fans know about. It is their longest track at 23 minutes and 32 seconds. It holds the entirety of the second side, and this isn't completely unheard of as well. There have been a number of albums to have done this up to this point. I mean, Iron Butterfly with In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida did it years and years before. But even with progressive rock, I mean, Tarkus from Emerson, Lake and Palmer came out earlier that year. Lizard from King Crimson came out the year before. Hell, even Pink Floyd themselves did something very similar with Atom Heart Mother. The title track, the first side off of Atom Heart Mother, was just a full-on one track. Now, with Echoes, it starts off with just that one note, and that one note is so recognizable within the progressive rock scene. It's like the moment you hear it, it's like a dinner bell ringing for a dog. You just know, you're like, this is Echoes. And just the power of that really speaks volumes. But it's also the lyrical content on this song as well. Like, when I graduated from grade 12, I wrote this lyric countless times in yearbooks of all of my friends, because it's still one of my favorite quotes, which is, "Strangers passing in the street, by chance two separate glances meet, and I am you and what you see is me." There's just the poetic brilliance of that just still gets me to this day. This track also holds the musical stylings that will continue the band forward from here. Like, this was them looking into the future of their career. Because, as I said, this album is almost like a crossroads. Like, this is kind of a watershed for them. This is when they're having the fun and leaving it behind, and then looking to the future and seeing where they're going, because you can see glimpses of where the band is going to go from here. The band took its time to really set up this track. And the chorus on this, I know Andrew Lloyd Webber stole or borrowed or took, or subconsciously or consciously, for Phantom of the Opera, because it is the exact same note sequence. I mean, if you don't believe me. the band never really cared. They're like, hey, it's still good music. But they took their time and really developed that, because it is what is so important later on. And here's why. So when we get to the midpoint of the song and it's more of a jam session, the boys are really playing, they're really exploring the space of the song, they're really having fun, and this is where that experimentation is really starting to pick up again. And when we come into that really dark section, I remember playing this for one of my friends in grade 12, and she like threw off the headphones when we had that guitar screaming from the night. It created such an eerie and creepy atmosphere, something that we still have not really been able to capture fully. And it is that concept of the echoes, of the almost like ghosts within the shadows of the atmosphere. Just beautiful. And we needed this. Like, this is what I was talking about. Like, we needed this. This is what I love within the chaotic resolution. Like, this is just pure chaos. There's no real structure. There's no real thing going on. There's a little bit of call and answer. It's very similar to, say, like what was King Crimson was trying to do within In the Wake of Poseidon, The Devil's Triangle, and Moonchild, where it was just chaos with no real structure. But what Pink Floyd did that was very brilliant was they didn't end it here. They brought in the slow build that would be used later on in other tracks and other long songs, such as Supper's Ready and Close to the Edge. They started to build the song back up, and they started to really develop the sounds, and this is the most important part. Once we get to the build, and it builds and it builds, and it comes into that finalized resolution where you finally have that driving force, and then it goes crashing back into the main chorus and the main theme, it creates such a rewarding listen, because we've gone through that hell, we've gone through that chaos to find the order, to find what we really love. And if we didn't have that chaos, that reward, that revisiting of themes wouldn't be as special as it is. And that is what the band tapped into, that you really had to work to get to that point. And because you put in the time, you put in the effort, and you put in that work, that payoff at the end is so much more satisfying. So, overall, this album really influenced a lot of music that was to come. If we didn't have this, we probably wouldn't have had like Dark Side of the Moon or Wish You Were Here or Animals or all those really big Pink Floyd albums, because this was them trying different techniques and seeing what stuck. And you can see that because they left the fun behind, because as fun as it wasn't quite working. I mean, this is why you don't really hear Pillow of Winds or Santopas or Seamus anymore, and you definitely hear echoes, and you still hear One of These Days. And so they took those ideas and they plunked them into the albums moving forward. I mean, if I were to finally rate this album, it would be, I love this album with my whole heart. It holds a very special place in my heart, and I'm very glad that my dad requested this album for me to review, because I've been re-listening to this album quite a bit, and I mean, outside of Echoes, which is a masterpiece all to its own, I've really grown to appreciate that first half of this album as well, because this is definitely the two sides of Pink Floyd kind of looking at one another, leaving the one behind and walking into the future for the other. So that's about it. What did you guys think of Meddle from Pink Floyd? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know of your own experiences with this album by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is going to be a new kind of a segment that I'm going to be doing by request. So let me know of an album that you want me to review by commenting down below. I'll pick one of those and do that one next, and then I'll continue to do that kind of a session of now that the dust has settled kind of thing. So thank you guys for watching. You guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.